Okay, right, today's session. So I'm very quickly going to run through all of kind of the standard marking options in Surpass Release 12. That includes the computer marking options and the human marking options. I just do want to stress, computer marking is still marking. Those items and responses don't get marked by magic. There aren't some magic marking fairies who come along and mark those responses. Surpass kind of has to be kind of programmed or instructed to kind of understand how to cope with and mark all of the responses a candidate might give to those items. I'm then going to talk a bit about Secure Marker. So this is kind of our specialist marking product for high volume marking. So some of you may be familiar with that if you're already using it. If not, don't worry. It's not part of the standard Surpass 12 offering, but I guess a bit like Concept Reducer, it's kind of a plug-in module that you can add in to enhance your product experience. I'm then going to hand over to Ian from RM, who is infinitely more qualified than me to talk to you a little bit about RM and RM Assessor and kind of the benefits that can bring to you. And then if you've got some questions, which I'm sure you will have after today's session, there'll hopefully be some time at the end where Ian and I can answer those and we can maybe have a bit of an open discussion. Okay, so kind of the simplest question type, kind of computer-based question type, we've got a bog standard multiple choice. So when an item author is creating a multiple choice question, they simply have to put the options, set out all the options and set which answer is correct. And then when Surpass gets responses to this particular item, basically if the candidate put the correct answer option, they'll get the marks, and if they didn't, they won't get the marks. So that's all fairly simple stuff. Computer marking's easy. Well, it's as easy as the question that you ask. So kind of the next level up from that is kind of a multiple response item. So same sort of thing, the author will lay out all of the answer options and they will mark the options that are correct. And if the candidate puts all the correct options, they'll get all the marks. But there's a slight complication here because there's a bit of a grey area. So what about if the candidate puts one right answer, one wrong answer? So does the system give them partial marks, or are we being really strict and saying, no, you have to get all the correct responses if you want to get all the marks? So we've kind of introduced kind of this little bit of flexibility into the marking algorithm here. So if you can't read that at the back, it's only award mark if candidate selects all correct options. Essentially, Mr. Author, should we allow partial marks for this item or not when marking? Okay, just another example, slightly more complicated computer marked item. So fill in the blank. So essentially here, the author's writing out a paragraph and putting some blanks in it, and then the candidate's required to fill in those blanks, as the name suggests. The author has to specify for each of those blanks kind of the acceptable correct answers. So they can either specify a single correct answer, or they can add multiple alternatives for each of the blanks. So they may be slight variations on spelling, or maybe equivalent kind of terms or synonyms that are also acceptable. Again, you've got the same problem here. So it's possible for a candidate to get everything right and they can get all the marks, but it's possible to get some right and some wrong. So in that scenario, should we give all the marks or just some of the marks? So again, we've got that same kind of partial mark checkbox, but we've also kind of got the additional function here where we can allow the author control on whether or not they want to care about case sensitivity. In some scenarios that may be useful, such as maybe an English grammar exam, that might be vitally important that the case is right, but in other scenarios they might not care, so kind of it's up to the author to kind of instruct Surpass on how the marking should work. Okay, just one final example with the computer marked items. We've got a numeric entry question type. So here we've kind of got some knowledge of the type of data that's being captured. So we can either automatically mark a specific value that the candidate responds with, but we also support a ranged value. So minus 42 and 42 that I've just put in here isn't probably the best example, but for when a candidate's required to maybe do a calculation and maybe wants to take into account rounding errors and there's an acceptable range of values, this might be the type of appropriate marking to use. So maybe anywhere between 0.5 and 0.51 would be acceptable, something like that. So it's just about the author instructing kind of the question how to deal with responses when they're received and what to do in all the scenarios. It's important for the item author to think through kind of all of the permutations. Okay, I just wanted to do kind of a quick summary of the computer mark stuff to begin with. So now moving on to the kind of human marked element. So kind of the standard way of doing this is within the marking tab in the test administration area of Surpass. So this is effectively kind of a dumping ground of all of the scripts. I haven't phrased that in the most eloquent way, but all candidate scripts that are submitted that contain responses that require human marking, those scripts will end up in this kind of marking tab in test administration. And depending on a user's permissions, that controls kind of the subset of scripts that they can see within this area. And this can be controlled on a center and subject basis. So where this works kind of really well is for internally assessed exams. So this is typically an exam or a test that's kind of delivered and marked in the same location. So maybe at a training provider where they want to kind of give a kind of a mock or a practice test to their kind of class, and then kind of that evening the tutor might go home, log on to Surpass, and they can just filter just for their centre, see all the scripts for the candidates, which is this list here. They can just cherry pick the scripts that they want to open. And then I don't know if you can see at the back, but so this script here is a mixture of kind of computer and human marked. It's just indicating in which sections there are items to human mark. So in section 2 here, there's 2 items that require human marking. The first is kind of an essay response. So the examiner's going to come in here, or the tutor's going to come in here, and they're going to mark that essay response. This is probably just a good moment just to kind of take a step back and look at the kind of marking interface. So I guess the most important thing here is up at the top here. That's where the mark is captured for that individual item. But down the bottom here, there's kind of a series of annotations that's available to the marker if they want to use, where they can highlight text and put ticks on. They can also put general comments. We also have the option for kind of symbols and fixed comments as well. I'll show you a bit more about them later on. But so which annotations are available for which test is controlled at the test level when you set the test up. So the author would then kind of systematically move through all the items in a script that require marking. So they've gone on to the kind of second item here that requires marking. They've kind of marked this equation. They've put the mark in. And when they assign that mark, you can see the progress for the script is kind of 100%, which means that all the human marking for that script that's been required has been done. So when they do that, they're prompted if they want to submit the whole script. And when they do that, they can then kind of go back to the marking screen and then kind of pick the next script that they want to mark. So that's all very good for that internally assessed scenario, but what it doesn't really provide much organisation or structure. So if you're an awarding organisation wanting to mark kind of centrally for maybe a national or kind of a global kind of assessment program, it's not going to work brilliantly if you've got kind of thousands of tests all happening in a day that require human marking that all kind of just come and flow into this kind of one central kind of area, because you're going to have permissions to see everything. You're just going to be overwhelmed with pages and pages of scripts that require marking. There's no actual way within kind of standard way within the kind of the standard marking functions past 12 to kind of allocate those scripts to specific individuals to make sure they're all divvied up and everyone's got something to do and everything's going to get marked within the relevant time. And there's also kind of no kind of quality control. It's a bit of a free-for-all what scripts you grab, and there's no way as an awarding organisation to know, are all my scripts being marked consistently? Is the quality maintained throughout? So I guess for those reasons, that's why we created Secure Marker, which is our, as I said before, kind of specialist marking product. And this is kind of designed to cope with kind of high volume marking. And lots of kind of individuals doing that marking, so lots of examiners, and kind of set up into a team structures. So this is kind of the home page. It's not very exciting. I don't know why I put this on a slide. Look at just taking a minute to look at it. So when a user logs in, typically as an examiner, you can see kind of the items that have been allocated to you to mark. You can see a quick shortcut to those then, so you can go in and get straight on with marking if that's what you want. And typically a welcome message may be displayed there. Okay, let's try and find something a bit more interesting. Okay, so this is kind of the quality control area of Secure Marker. So what you're seeing in this table here is kind of the structure of the test that you're marking. So one thing that's kind of fundamentally different in Secure Marker is the marking is item-based as opposed to script-based. So examiners aren't allocated scripts to mark, they're allocated what we call quotas of items to mark. So it might be examiner A has 100 question 1s to mark and 100 question 2s, and examiner B has 100 question 1s and 100 question 3s. And the system knows how many responses of each item are to mark and how many examiners there are, and then the mechanisms are in place that they can be allocated to the different examiners. But before marking starts in Secure Marker, we have kind of quality control, and this is about kind of setting up, well, basically how to monitor and maintain the quality throughout the marking process. You've got a lot of markers marking your script, so you need to be sure that they're all marking consistently and all candidates are being treated fairly. So in here, it's possible to create what we call control items. So senior examiners can kind of look at candidate responses, and they can model mark them. So like a demonstration of how the mark scheme should be applied. And they can create a number of these pre-marked items for each item in the test that you're setting up. And then what they can do is I won't go through each of these options, they can kind of almost program Secure Marker to say how frequently these seed or control items should be presented to examiners when marking. So they're presented blind, so an examiner doesn't know when they're marking a seed, but effectively when they are presented with a seed, the system's comparing the mark the examiner gives with the known mark for the item that the senior's already given. And it's possible to set up here how frequently those seeds are given, and what to do in scenarios if the examiner is consistently marking out of tolerance. So ultimately, at some point, if an examiner is continually marking badly, they should be kind of stopped and suspended from marking that particular item. Okay, let's move on to the kind of the quota management side of Secure Marker. So this is kind of the operational hub of Secure Marker. So this is kind of about the day-to-day running and of marking. So I guess down the left here, you can see all the questions in the test that require marking, and on the right here, you can see for this particular item, all the examiners that have been assigned quotas for that particular item. So you can see how many responses are required to be marked, how many have been marked, and how many are left to be marked. So in here, you can assign individual quotas to examiners, monitor how an examiner is getting on with their quota. You can do all the management of the stopping and starting of examiners. So you can manually suspend the examiner for marking a particular item if you want, if you've got concerns about the examiner's quality, or you can restart them if they have been suspended and you've kind of talked that through with them and you're happy that they now understand why they were stopped. You can then restart them and let them continue marking that item. You can also in here, in real time, see all the items, all the responses, all the marked responses in real time. So you can filter either for a particular examiner, you can see just what they've marked. If you want to, you can filter just for a given time frame, like what did this examiner mark on Tuesday afternoon, if you have concerns about them marking that period. Or you can just kind of look at all the marking across all examiners. You can also do kind of slightly more sophisticated things. Like this is an example that's showing how, I think the green line on this graph, how that examiner is marking compared to the average of all the other examiners. If you want to see if an examiner is maybe marking more generously or kind of a bit stingy compared to the mean, it's kind of a good way of just kind of monitoring your examiners and kind of proactively looking at them as progress through the marking process. Okay, let's have a look at marking in Secure Marker, I suppose, kind of the primary function. So I kind of showed you that kind of little shortcut on the home page, but this is the marking tab that was typically the only screen that an examiner would have access to. So this table kind of shows all of the quotas that they've been assigned, so all of the marking that their kind of team leader or senior has assigned them to do. And then it's just as simple as they select kind of which question they want to mark, and then they're kind of presented with a response to mark. So the actual interface is quite similar to that which is available as standard in Surpass 12. So they can put the mark in at the top there. They've got all of the annotations down the bottom here. They can also download the mark scheme as well, so that all the mark instructions, which has been set up by the item author. Yeah.
So they don't know who they are marking.
No. So it's anonymous. It's anonymous marking, yes. And also you'll notice that kind of because when it was script based in standard Surpass 12. So what they could do is navigate through the script and change sections and change items. In item based marking, they're simply presented with a response. They can look at it. They can mark it. It takes a bit more time than that, but there isn't just a button you can press to do that. So they can annotate it, they can set up all their comments. There's kind of a palette of symbols they can use that can be set up and configured on a test-by-test basis, and they can put the mark in. And when they click submit up there to submit that mark, they'll just be presented with the next response for that particular item, and they can just keep going through, in this case, question 2 after question 2 after question 2 response, and they can almost get in the zone and the mindset of how question 2 works. It's kind of a more efficient way of marking. Okay, so finally in Secure Marker we kind of have this control panel or kind of script review screen, which kind of gives an overview of all the scripts that are in the marking system, kind of the status they're at, when they were into the marking system, or kind of when they're due, so what their turnaround time should be. You can kind of tweak the allocation algorithm, so as standard it's kind of a first in, first out kind of algorithm. So the items, the scripts that have been in Secure Marker the longest will be the ones that are allocated to be marked next. But if you want, you can switch on what we call VIP mode to kind of queue jump them if you want to turn around the scripts quite quickly. And this kind of gives you kind of an operational overview to make sure that you're kind of meeting all of your agreed marking targets. Okay, there is one kind of slightly tricky to understand concept that I'm just going to explain to finish with in Secure Marker. So it's the concept of unique responses, and I'm just going to run through an example to try and explain this to you all today. Some people just instantly get it, and some of you hopefully already know what I'm talking about, and some of you might take a little bit longer, but I'm going to try and make it my mission today to try and get everyone to understand kind of this concept, because I think it's quite neat, quite key, and kind of a real positive of Secure Marker. Okay, so let's just take a question. So you're asking the candidates, write down a quote from any of Shakespeare's works. Maybe not the best question, but it's the example I've chosen. We've got 4 candidates. So Mr. Red, Mr. Green, Blue, Mr. Yellow. So each of those candidates provides their response for that particular question. Let's have a look at those. So Mr. Red goes to be or not to be. It's a classic. Hamlet. Mr. Green. First thing we do, let's kill all the lawyers. It's very good, Mr. Green. Henry VI, yeah, very good. Mr. Blue, well, stick with what you know better to get the question right. To be or not to be again. Mr. Yellow, we all live in a yellow submarine. So kind of traditionally what would happen is an examiner, kind of a highly qualified examiner that's meant to represent, kind of a valuable resource, would come along and they'd evaluate kind of each candidate's response. They'd think about what mark they wanted to give the response, and they'd allocate that mark to the candidates. They'd then move to the next candidate response, have a think about that, allocate the mark to that response. And then the next one, think about the mark, allocate that to response. The final one, look at that, that's wrong, allocate that mark to that response. So they just kind of systematically work through all the responses, and at the top here we can see each of the candidates has had a kind of a mark assigned to their response. But if you think about what's actually happening here, we've got 4 candidates, but we've only actually got 3 kind of different responses, or 3 unique responses. It just so happens that 2 of the candidates, kind of Mr. Red and Mr. Blue, have put the same response. Mr. Green's put his response, and Mr. Yellow's put his response. So what the examiner needs to do is come along, look at each of the distinct or unique responses, think about what mark they want to assign to that, assign that to the response, and then Secure Marker can take care of the rest. It can then assign that mark to all of the candidates that are associated with that response. Likewise, they can move to the next response and the final one. So we've got the same result at the top here. We've got a mark assigned to each candidate, but what Secure Marker has actually done for you is cut your marking bill by 25% there in this particular example. So obviously this isn't going to work in kind of with all question types, but it is kind of a really useful kind of feature to and a function of Secure Marker that it is worth understanding. It is slightly better than that though, because it doesn't just work for kind of one round of marking. A few months later, kind of Mr. Purple comes along. He too sticks with what he knows, to be or not to be. Secure Marker can just computer mark that. It doesn't need to put that to an examiner. It knows how to mark that particular response. So almost for free, you're getting that response marked. It's learned how to mark that response. Likewise, Mr. Pink comes along. First thing we do, let's kill all the lawyers. You can just mark that for free. It's kind of learning all the time. Mr. Amber comes along. He's a friend of Mr. Yellow. Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. That still needs to be assigned to an examiner, and it still marks it wrong. It doesn't just learn that all Beatles songs are incorrect, non-Shakespearean quotes. But it's kind of learning all the time, and especially if you're using your items over a long period of time, then Secure Marker can get quite sophisticated, and it kind of take the sting and the load out of marking and just put to examiners, which is kind of a costly resource, just what is needed to be marked.
What about the answer to be or not to be? That's the question.
What, sorry?
What about the answer to be or not to be? That's the question. When someone gives a different answer.
Right. So it's unique responses. So that would technically be a different quote. So there would need to be. It's not clever enough to kind of finish off quotes. It has to be exactly the same. Okay. So with well, with an essay-based question, typically, hang on one at a time. With essay-based questions, typically everyone's going to be giving you a unique response, and you'd worry if they didn't. You may get some savings where certain candidates leave it blank or something because they don't write anything, and then you only have to mark the blank response once instead of marking multiple blank responses. But you're not really going to get a whole lot of savings with an essay response. So with short answers, it kind of works, just where it's on the cusp of being a bit too complicated to be computer marked, but it needs to be human marked. It kind of has a big advantage in that area. But another key area where it's useful is kind of for computer marked items that only have a finite number of possible unique responses. If they didn't, we couldn't computer mark them. But right now, it's quite tricky in Surpass that if retrospectively you realise that you've kind of messed up your computer marking kind of algorithm setup, which is why I showed you that at the start, and you've kind of missed a trick really, or you've maybe circumstances have changed, and maybe you asked like a topical question, and between the time of authoring and the time of delivery to the candidate, situations change, and you now want to mark it differently to how it was originally intended. You might want to kind of tweak that marking, but that right now in Surpass, that's quite a difficult thing to do. But sorry, Tim just flashed a sign at me, just massively put me off. Yeah, but what you can do now is, effectively, if you think about that diagram, you can have as many candidates as you want putting responses along the top, but for something like a multiple choice, there is only 5 unique responses, A, B, C, D, or not attempted. You just reassign marks to them, and then they get allocated out to those candidates. So you can quite quickly remark, humanly, if that's a word, computer marked items in Secure Marker, and Secure Marker provides that functionality. Okay, so enough of me talking. We now support plugging in third-party marking systems in Surpass. So this is kind of the big, exciting bit of functionality that I'm kind of proud to talk to you about today. We've removed your pain of kind of managing multiple systems and suppliers in Surpass. So if you wanted to do this previously, you'd have to manage that relationship yourself. You have to pull information via integration out of Surpass and push that into your preferred marking system. So we've been kind of proudly working with RM for the best part of a year now, and you can now use RM Assessor to mark exams taken in Surpass. Why you'd want to do that, I'm going to hand over to Ian now to talk to you about.
I did wonder whether you were going to say why you'd want to do that.
You picked up on that.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ian Castledine. I'm a solution architect at RM Results. And Dave and I have been working very closely over the last, well, it is about 12 months or so. And actually, different parts of our respective organisations have been working together as well. So, you know, some of my colleagues are here today, and it's been great to build that that relationship over the last few months. Dave, the relationship only goes so far, you know. Do bear with us.
Very close.
Excellent. Oh, we have a very close relationship, absolutely. So, why use our RM Assessor, and why are we even talking about this? Well, as we know, as Dave said, we know a number of our shared customers already use Assessor and already use Surpass, and there's a sort of a natural desire almost to say, well, actually, we're doing these two systems and we like them and we want to keep using them. So, well, how can we do it? RM Assessor has got a very long heritage of marking paper-based exams particularly, but it also is a great tool for marking different types of content, whether that's computer-based tests or other things as well. So we've got a number of customers using it to mark portfolios of work, and I'll just dip into that a little bit this afternoon as well. Dave's picked up on some of the aspects of secure marker that are particularly used in high-stakes marking, and RM Assessor, there's an element of Me Too that, you know, there's a lot of commonalities between the two products, and equally Assessor does, you know, a whole load of different things as well. So there's a number of reasons why you might want to be looking at that as a marking tool. But the reason that we're both stood here talking today is that actually this relationship means that there's an extra piece of an extra bit of flexibility open to you, and we just want to make you aware of that and of some of the new options that are now available. So for those of you that don't know, RM, it's been around about 40 odd years. Heritage building software and services for the education, for IT and education. Predominantly in the UK, and up until fairly recently, we got a big manufacturing plant and we built PCs for schools. That's what we were known for doing. That continues today. We also have a large catalogue business that sells educational IT supplies around the world. But RM Results is our assessment and data business. And we work with ministries of education and awarding bodies, both for GQ and also professional qualifications around the world. And our flagship product is RM Assessor. Last year it was used to, well, this year has been used to mark something like about 160 million pages of exams. That equates to, Heather will shout at me if I get this wrong, it's about 10 million exam scripts, exam responses. Still predominantly paper. RM Assessor first came to being about 12 years ago as primarily for the marking of paper-based exams on screen. But now is also used for marking computer-based tests and for marking other types of content. So this year is about something like 150,000 e-portfolios of responses of you know, Word documents and things like that have also been marked in Assessor. A number of these things Dave picked up. Assessor's really, our focus at the moment is about providing a tool that can mark anything, anywhere. So it's a web-based tool, And as we'll dip into in a moment, the same consistent interface can be used to mark paper content or exams taken in Surpass or portfolios of candidate work. One of the core principles that we have that have underpinned all of our approach to the tool is it's a high stakes tool and it's got to guarantee marking quality. And so we support that end-to-end process of the whole marking workflow, from the initial process of recruiting of markers and supporting that process, through the monitoring and maintenance of that marking process, through to getting high quality results out at the end. But in a way that's very, very configurable. And for those of you that know Assessor, in some ways its configurability is, it really is so configurable that it can adapt to suit your existing processes. And that's been very important to us, that rather than saying that you've got to change your processes to adopt the system, actually it can be configured to suit existing business processes. I'm going to dip a little bit into the team management and support. It's used to mark high volumes of scripts, and so therefore has got processes and systems in place to support that, to support large hierarchical marking teams, and then to support markers within those teams during that marking process. And then just picking up down the bottom here, that assessors also, it doesn't try to spit out grades for students, but it can support the awarding process, particularly by being used to support the review of, for example, the borderline cases when you're trying to work through grade boundaries particularly. And then also around the process of supporting remarking. So two things just before we just have a quick look inside Assessor. Just to reinforce this point about marking anything, and this is really what underpins our relationship with BTL. RM had an existing customer who've worked with us for about the last 5 years or so to mark their paper-based exams, and it was the move to their slow transition to computer-based testing which said, actually, we really ought to be working together here, and how can we do that? And that's very aligned with RM's strategy for Assessor. So the same tool can be used by markers who are marking scripts for delivery on paper or computer, and that's really what this is getting at. That as a single tool that can be used to mark different items that are coming from different places, different types of items, and then being marked in different ways, whether that's being marked by script, so candidates starting at the top of the script and working down, marking by question, as Dave's just been through, and then we'll have a look at a couple of different ways that it can be used to mark, and again trying to provide some consistency regardless of what the source of that exam actually is. This type of model will be familiar to you, but I bring it up because, again, it's quite important to us as an organisation and thinking about how we sustain marking quality. This is talking about the means of identifying scripts, exams that are good examples that we want to be using to mark definitively, and then using as control items through that process. Whether that's about the earliest stages of markers becoming familiar with the system, or the mark scheme itself, and being able to test themselves against that to see whether they're marking in the way that the mark scheme was intended to be used, through to standardisation, which is the gateway to live marking. And then the ongoing monitoring of that using control items or seeds. I lay that out as a framework because Assessor is designed to give a lot of flexibility about how you use that as an awarding body. And some awarding bodies just not use any of this, or not use aspects of this, or focus instead on more a supervision model. Point here is that each of these, all of this applies to the different exam types, whether that's paper or computer-based tests, the same quality model can apply throughout. So let's have a little bit of a look. Here we're seeing on screen RM Assessor as the marking tool, and it's presenting in the middle here a test that's authored in Surpass. Test delivered in Surpass, and what you're seeing here is the exact view that the candidates saw. I can move on and see different type, and basically whatever we show in Surpass, we can just drop in here into Assessor. I'll talk a little bit in a moment about technically how we do that, but effectively you're not looking at a screen grab or anything like that. This is actually the player that underpins the test delivery engine being presented within the marking tool. That's important for a couple of reasons. The main one being that if, for example, you want a marker to be able to look in a little bit more detail about some of the content, so for example, maybe there was a pre-recorded recording, an audio recording, they could play that. For example, if this was a spreadsheet and you wanted the marker to be able to look in a little more detail at that to see, for example, what the formula was that they'd entered, be able to do that by interacting with the player. So it's more than just a screen grab. But beyond that, the same tools that are available for marking paper scripts are also available here. So for example, we've got the ability to mark by annotation, and we can turn an annotation layer on that sits on the top and allows you to still mark by annotation and tell the story. So add comments, just like Dave showed just now. One of the things that Assessor does really quite nicely that some awarding bodies choose to use is to attach marks to particular annotations. So for example, we've got a tick 1 and a tick 2, for example. And some awarding bodies like to be able to use that type of mark where they annotate and it automatically assigns a score. Over here on the right-hand side, we see mark scheme. This example, I've actually got 3 particular words. If I go back a step back here, I've got 1A, 1B, 1C, very configurable. Can show you whatever you fancy, really. And if you want to, then marks can be entered through the keyboard or through a drop-down box. And each item can be set up with exactly the marks that you want to have available. So it could be marking half marks, for example, or marks out of 5, whatever it is. We're showing here just one question, and this is because this particular example has been set up with the marker just having responsibility for that one question item. But equally, they could have access to the whole script or groups of questions items. So that's very flexible as to how that's presented here. And then we provide the option either for markers to, as Dave described just now, to click from question 2 for one candidate to the next candidate, and so on, or to start at the top of the candidate script and work their way down. But as they click on the item in the mark scheme, then the player refreshes and it downloads the correct content for that particular candidate response. So what else can Assessor do? I'm not going to go back through. There's a lot of things that Dave picked up in Secure Marker can be found in Assessor as well. But I guess just to pick out a couple of things. I mentioned earlier that we built in the ability to to structure and build that team hierarchy, and that allows us to provide a messaging system built into the product that means markers can communicate directly with their supervisor about particular things without having to go to an external system. So it keeps everything within the same environment. They could, for example, just send a message about a particular marker. I'm actually logged in here as a user who's got access to a team, so I think I'm logged in as V Ronnie, whoever he or she is, and so I can send a message to a particular member of my team. If I'm a marker, I can communicate just with the supervisor who looks after me. I can also raise exceptions, if I could speak, as well. So, for example, if a particular issue arose where a marker opens a response and says, you know what, that doesn't look right, there's something not right here. Or maybe the content's just objectionable, and they just don't. They need to raise an issue. Exceptions can be raised to an appropriate person, supervisor, awarding body, or whoever that needs to go to. I pick out here again that sort of hierarchy. So one of our tools within the marking tool allows supervisors to be able to review their team, see how they're getting on with marking, monitor progress, and this again is consistent whether you're marking computer-based or any other type of response. I'm going to skip over that because that's horrible. I think you had a horrible one as well, didn't you? There we go. I think that's my version of your horrible one.
Yeah, actually the homepage.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So just to finish off, just put a little bit of context on this. I mentioned that the heritage is around marking paper, and what that means is that examiners get to see a scanned version of a paper-based script, and this is historically what Assessor has been used predominantly for. And RM Results manages that end-to-end process from receiving the boxes of paper scripts, from the scanning and indexing them and connecting them up to the right candidate entry in the system, and then presenting that scanned image through to markers. So we're looking here at an unstructured script, consistent type of interface, so consistent annotations and a mark entry, for example. It can also handle structured responses where we know exactly where a candidate response is, and this is very much like how we're able to achieve the computer-based tests, because we know that a particular response is in a particular place, and we achieve the same on paper by zoning a candidate script. So we know that 4 centimetres down on page 3 we'll find question 2, for example. I mentioned marking of other stuff, and it's just a couple of examples. So a number of awarding bodies we work with send in things like Word documents, and again, can be marked in the same way. You can get a bit of a sense of a theme here. This is a Word document that's been converted and displayed to the marker in the background as an image. We're also using, apologies for the oversized rabbit in the middle. This is showing a portfolio of work. Again, consistent interface, but this time you're seeing a list of files, and if we're able to, so if it's an audio file, a video file, or a Word document or something like that, it can be displayed in the marking screen as well. And if it's not, if it's something weird and wacky, it can still be accessed through the same interface, but it just opens outside the marking tool. And this is an area that RM's really focusing quite a lot of attention on now as well. But going back to the computer-based testing, we've alluded to the fact that we've been working together as organisations. What we've also done is build some technology to allow BTL tests to be marked in Assessor. And that's really glued together by what we call an integration engine that RM Results has built over the last few months. And effectively, it enables different systems to pass data to and from each other. So in the examples we're working with BTL, an awarding body, for example, might send a candidate entry into the integration engine. They don't have to send it to Surpass and then to Assessor. It just gets sent in once. And the integration engine then handles the translation of data between different systems, because believe it or not, RM Assessor and BTL Surpass talk a different language. And so the integration engine worries about the translation of data between those languages. The other thing that it's doing is collecting responses that have been taken by candidates and passing them across so they're ready for marking. And that's done without any intervention by the awarding body at all. So there's a scheduler that sits and runs, and every few minutes it queries Surpass and says, is there anything ready for marking? If so, it passes across. So just to draw my bit to a close, RM Assessor, world's most widely used, I didn't say that, high stakes exam system in the world, but can mark anything and anywhere. But we're really pleased actually to be working with BTL. I mean, 12 months ago, Dave joked, but we wouldn't have necessarily been welcome at this event, believe it or not. No. So we really are delighted to be working with BTL, and we're finding as organisations that there's a lot of commonalities in our approach. So it's been a great time, and it does provide you with more flexibility. And I think it's that really underpins what we're about. And this is good to go, actually. So if you are interested in looking at how we glue these systems together for you, then we would be, both Dave and I and others would be pleased to talk to you and show you a bit more detail about that as well.